Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero. Our guest today is James Altucher. He is famously good at starting companies and selling them, but at his core, he is a writer. He's done all kinds of things in his life. He has a BS in computer science from Cornell. He started his career working in IT for HBO and eventually hosted a show there. He founded Reset Inc. and sold it. He wrote about stocks for Jim Cramer and became a hedge fund manager. He founded the website Stock Picker and sold it. He was a seed investor in Buddy Media, which was acquired by Salesforce for $745 million. So he's not hurting for money. He's a chess master, a speaker, and now a stand-up comedian, and he really is getting after it. But he's been blogging since blogging was a thing. He's written 20 books, and he's been hosting the James Altucher Show for years, on which he helps all of us make sense of the habits and traits of the world's top performers and most interesting people. Well, it takes one to know one. Pete and I are both big fans of his. You can link to all of his content on jamesaltucher.com, and you are absolutely going to love him. Here's James Altucher.
Lions Rock Productions.
This is Jay
This
Moore.
is Greg Proops.
This is Jordan Harbinger.
This is Dexter from The Offspring.
This is Nathan
This is
East.
Sebastian Younger.
This is Rick
This
Marotta.
is Stuart Copeland.
This is Mick Gillette.
This is Andy Summers.
Hey, this is Skunk Baxter.
This is Gabby Reese.
This is Rob Bell.
Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero.
Hey, and this is Pete A. Turner.
This is James Altucher, and you're listening to the Break It Down Show.
And now, the Break It Down Show with John Leon Guerrero and Pete A. Turner.
James Altucher is an author, a podcaster, an angel investor, a chess master. He's even taken to the stage as a stand-up comedian. He's the face and the proprietor of Choose Yourself Media, where he's dedicated to curating the experiences and practices of the world's top performers in practically every interesting field. He shares that information with us on jamesaltucher.com, and you should go there and read, listen, subscribe, soak up everything to make yourself and your experience better. His latest book, I think it's your latest book, is called Reinvent Yourself, something he's clearly done many times, does over and over again, and it certainly gets our attention. And James, thank you for joining us. We're elated, man.
Thank you for inviting me onto the show. I'm so happy to be here.
Hey, so I know you met my girlfriend, and she always follows you, and that's how I keep up with what you're doing. But she said that you've had a bit of a tough week, man. Are you all right?
Oh, yeah. I wonder why she said that. I'm trying to think.
Maybe because you published your phone number? What was that about?
Oh, yeah. No, that was an interview that somebody did with me, and they said, what's the weirdest text I ever had? But that was a text I got years ago. So somebody sent me a text saying that I had implanted electronic chips into his brain, and I was controlling him using top secret CIA Zionist technology. And why wasn't I using my platform to write about this? So that was probably the weirdest text I ever got.
I'm not sure whether he was troubled because you were spying on him or whether he was bothered that you didn't write about him because you didn't find him that interesting.
Yeah. Well, if you go to his website, I won't say what the website is, but if you go to his website, it's really, he's got post after post about me controlling him. So it's a little disturbing.
Okay. So the thing that fascinates us about you is that you've done a lot of just crazy stuff that we can tell you're doing as an experiment for yourself. It's not like, hey, I'm going to do this. This will be a great publicity stunt. This will get a lot of attention. Because
yeah, I never really do it. If you do something as like a stunt, it's almost guaranteed to fail. But if you do something because you have vision behind it and you really want to explore some aspect of life that is making you curious or you think will make you better, then you have opportunity to learn from it, and there's many ways to express it and be creative around it, and that's what people pay attention to. Because usually you're exploring something that other people want to explore as well, and that's interesting.
So one of the things that you did that really caught our attention is a couple years ago you spent many months, maybe a year and a half, with just 15 belongings in your life.
3 years.
3 years you did that?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Just stopped it really like a
year
ago.
To punctuate your point, you did that for you, and you did that for the sake of the experiment because you got hit up by practically everybody who wanted to make a movie about it, and you turned them all down.
Yeah, I mean, everybody was trying. Well, first off, the New York Times ran this profile, and then suddenly I was getting calls from all over the entertainment industry, people wanting to do TV shows, do movies, and I thought about it. Like, I thought of different ideas. I wasn't 100% against it, but it just seemed like a lot of work, and B, there are people who are real minimalists, like homeless people, who really only have 15 belongings. And I don't know, I didn't really think I was more interesting than those people. I needed to do this for myself and not, try to benefit from it in any way. It was just something I was doing for me.
And what was the for you experience that you I know I'm asking you to encapsulate 3 years of living like a vagabond, and you probably learned a ton of things, but if you could cook it down to something that we can all take with us, just some proverb for us and our listeners, what is it you think you learned?
Yeah, I mean, I learned that I didn't really need anything. So I could basically live in any situation with no belongings. Everybody says, oh, like the Marie Kondo method, keep the objects you love. And I realized I don't know what that means. I didn't really need to love any objects. Like, I love humans and I use objects, but much better to do that than to love objects and use humans. So I learned that I could basically, like, I remember one time, Airbnb, of course, heard about what I was doing. I was only living in Airbnbs. I wasn't renting a home or owning a home, because when you live in an Airbnb, you get all these items along with the Airbnb, like towels and dishes and sheets. So I didn't really need anything other than my clothes and a computer and a phone. And I would read books on the Kindle Reader app on my phone. And so I basically learned that whenever there was, like, I passed by a store or even a bookstore or a clothing store, and I said, oh, I like that shirt, I want it, I controlled the impulse to just go in and buy it. And it wasn't a big deal. I didn't really need to buy anything. Now, of course, I was spending money. I was renting Airbnbs. It's not like I was living in the street, and I was ordering food. I would never go grocery shopping either. I didn't want to go grocery shopping at all. So I would always order delivery, or I would eat out. And so those were the only two things I spent money on. And I didn't really travel. Like, people think, oh, it must be cool, you could travel all around the world Airbnb-ing. I didn't really travel much. I mean, I went to LA once maybe or twice, but I most of the time stayed in New York City and just moved around New York City. So I didn't travel that much, and I didn't really spend that much money other than the Airbnbs. But I would also say that people would say, oh, you must have felt really free and you must have felt really happy. Not really. Like, I think when you have a home, that also has a kind of freedom with it. Like, you're free to not constantly be looking for where you're going to live next. And I wasn't necessarily happier. Just like, I threw away some things that I missed. And so that gave me a melancholy kind of feeling, which is not necessarily a negative feeling, but it's different from happiness. So it was just a different kind of feeling. Like, it was a feeling that I didn't really need anything. And it's even though now I live in an apartment and I've been accumulating things again, like books, it's not like it gave me a discipline where I feel like I don't really have to buy anything. There's nothing I actually really need to have in order for my life to be better.
That is terrific. I don't think everybody's emotionally prepared to go to that experience, and I think that you illustrate that one of the things that allowed you to do it was that you prepared yourself, or you had circumstances that prepared you to do it emotionally, because you're describing a way of looking at things like, oh, I had belongings that meant something to me, and I'm melancholy about it. But I know that some people would lose their minds if they had, mementos and stuff that they no longer had. So,
well, think about people who, let's say, experience tragically, like a fire, their house burns down and they lose family photos and heirlooms and things like that. They're sad about it, but then they get over it. Like, I can just say this from personal experience, but also science has shown that if something negative happens to you, chances are within a few months or a year or a few years, you bounce back to the same level of happiness or unhappiness that you had before you lost everything. So I kind of knew that for me, and it's not necessarily a positive thing. Like I said to myself, it's not like I said, boy, I want a life of freedom, so I'm just going to throw everything out. There were some negative aspects too. Like I really, I didn't want to, I have a hard time dealing with lots of paperwork and items. So I had a lease ending in an apartment and, a rental. And I didn't want to deal with, putting all my belongings in storage and all the paperwork and renting a new place, which is in New York City to even rent an apartment, you need like 6 personal references, a reference from your accountant, a reference from your lawyer. You got to take photographs of bank statements. You got to send in your IRS statements. You got to get approval of a board. It was just a drag. So I figured, you know what? I cannot physically, mentally deal with this. And the only solution to not dealing with it was to throw everything out and live in Airbnbs, because you can't carry all your stuff around to Airbnbs. I would just have a carry-on bag that I would take to Airbnbs. And when I woke up every day, I would take my bag with me. So it was as if I never even, as if I didn't live anywhere. It just wherever I was where I lived.
Oh my!
I remember I went on the stage at the Airbnb conference. They have this annual conference. I went on the stage with my bag, and I said, I just moved onto this stage right now. And it was true. I didn't have any place to go that night, and I was just living on that stage.
That was just
moment.
as much where you lived as wherever you were the night before.
Yeah, except there was no toilet, so I would have to shit on the stage if I really needed to go to the bathroom.
Let's talk about Reinvent Yourself, because I think it's your most recent book, right? But it's from the year before last.
Yeah, actually, I've written a couple of books that I haven't put on Amazon yet. One's called The Side Hustle Bible, which is about side hustles you could do from home. Another one's called, I haven't released this one at all yet, but it's called Think Like a Billionaire. And it's about, I've interviewed a couple dozen billionaires on my podcast, so I kind of summarize the results. But Reinvent Yourself, I would say, is the last kind of, big book that I've published.
It hits home for both Pete and for me, because we're right around the same age as you and constantly just having to reinvent ourselves to keep up.
Well, tell me, what are your last couple of reinventions?
I'm currently, we're doing this podcast. I'm also writing and producing an audio drama. Currently for money, I'm running a construction company. As recently as 2 years ago as a private investigator. And
whoa, wait a second. What were you doing as a private investigator?
I had owned a martial arts studio with a friend of mine who was a cop. And when he retired from the police force, he said, hey, I want to open up a private detective agency. And I said, wow, that sounds exciting. And he said, I was hoping you'd say that. And he roped me in because, we had been business partners before. So he said, it's just us being business partners, except, you get to carry a gun. And I was like, okay, that sounds like fun. So we did that, and we...
Do you get to carry a gun just because you're a private investigator?
I suppose you could be a private investigator and not carry one, but why would you do that? It sounded like more fun.
But how can you legally
run
do
around
that?
like
Particularly in California,
Thomas
it's got to be
Magnum.
hard.
It's a permitting process like everything else, but you can, and in the worlds that we were running around in, because we did a whole lot of investigating of criminal cases. So, we found ourselves in some pretty nasty spots where...
Wait, how would you get a case? And then what were some of the nasty
spots?
Well,
we would get cases from our clients were attorneys. And so our attorneys would say, I have a new client, his name is such and such, and he's going to trial for murder. So you have to go talk to all of his friends. And sometimes when you knock on the doors of friends who are facing murder charges, they're not used to getting their door knocked on. And especially when you look like me and not them, they're a little less welcoming sometimes. And so we would find ourselves in those positions. And my friend, who was my partner, he looks like a cop. I mean, he was a cop for, he was a cop for 20 something years. And when you take one look at that guy and you go, oh, here comes a cop. So yeah, we would find ourselves in those places. So reinventing.
And like, did you change the outcome of any murder cases?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, we did have some fun things, but I'm not going to tell you about them on the air because I'm developing an audio drama based on that experience. Yeah.
Oh, okay, great. And so look, and what did you get your degree in?
I didn't. Never finished college. Pete's got degrees though.
Okay, so you never
He's
finished
smarter
college.
than I am.
You've never finished college. You've owned businesses. Yep. You've run different business, construction company, private detective agency, audio drama. That's just part of life. And people, for a small period of history, that wasn't part of life. You would major in botany, and you would become a gardener or a florist, and that's what you would do for your life. Or you would major in optical engineering and work in some kind of factory, and that's what you do for your whole life. But that was just like a small period of history. But the reality is, people want to do many things. We're kind of nomadic creatures, and that doesn't mean just being a nomad in where you live, but it also means being a nomad in what you do and how you think. And at different times in our life, we're interested in different things. When we're in our 20s, maybe we want to be a race car driver. When we're in our 30s, maybe we want to be a stockbroker or a day trader or a real estate agent or buy real estate. When we're in our 40s, maybe we secretly want to be a baseball game announcer. When we're 50s, I don't know, I want to just watch TV a lot. Like you want to settle down at some point, and your life changes and your motives change and your inspirations change.
Well, just so our listeners can relate to you, I want to point out, for those who know less about you, that you've started 20 businesses and 17 of them have failed. And you've written a lot of books that are great and a lot of books that were not great on the way to those great books. So for those of us who are still banging around trying to figure things out and doing things and failing at things, I find it inspiring, and I think that most of us who follow you find it inspiring that there is light at the end of the tunnel, and that it's not true that it's necessarily light at the end of the tunnel, but there are lights along the tunnel.
Yeah, I mean, first off, every time you start something you love, you're going to suck at it almost by definition, because you love it. So the reason you love it is because it's worthy of loving, and meaning it should be difficult. It should be hard to achieve mastery in. That means you see the people who have achieved mastery in it, and you see the difference. Because you love something, you see the nuances, and you see the difference between the masters in what you love and where you are. So you suck in the beginning. Whether it's being a writer or a podcaster or probably a private investigator, you see your mistakes, and and there's no real goal. It's not like you're going to be, as an example, the best private investigator in the world. There's no such thing. There's no. The only goal is to kind of improve. Is to kind of take pleasure from the process of learning and improving. Because it's very rare in life that one gets to be the best in the universe at anything. And I think it's not that you reinvent yourself to some other goal. Reinvention itself is a pleasure. And that skill, the skill of reinvention, is a pleasure. And that skill is something worth learning. So it's like meta learning the skill of reinvention makes whatever you're reinventing towards even more fun and interesting and quicker. So, in the reinventions that I've done, I mean, I've been, I started off as a software engineer, then I got into the entertainment industry, then I got into I built a web agency in the 90s. So then suddenly now I'm an entrepreneur. Then I became a day trader, then a hedge fund manager. So suddenly went from software to entertainment to entrepreneurship to investing in stocks to investing in other things, and then I was I've been a writer for
the whole time, pretty much. That's kind of been your through line.
Yeah, writing's probably been the most consistent thing all throughout. But I've been a podcaster. I still am, and Pete just saw me do stand-up comedy. I've been doing stand-up comedy for 4 years. I've been a public speaker for almost 20. I when I was a kid, I was a chess master, which is a hard skill to learn. But again, I couldn't be the world champion. I would have to settle, quote unquote, with being just a master at it. And you could either enjoy that, or you can say, "Ugh, I'm depressed. I'm never going to be the best in the world at an incredibly difficult thing." And it's what you make of it. It's why it's good to diversify the things you're good at, and you meet people along the way in all the different subcultures. Like when I go to California, when I go to LA, for instance, I can hang out with the chess players I know. I can hang out with the comedians I know. I can hang out with the business people I know. I can hang out with the venture capitalists I know. And so you by reinventing yourself, there's not only skills you learn, there's also different subcultures that you can socially interact with, and that's a pleasure as well.
So you've been all of these things, all these disparate things, and built yourself into who you are now. I'm curious if that's who you are. You're sort of this, personal adventurer. You don't got to go to the South Pole, but you want to try stand-up comedy. You want to try, this different thing, and you're not necessarily like I'm very similar in my life, where I want to try new things and learn new things and get to the point of mastery or whatever it's going to be. But it seems like I like to have a good bit of miscomfort, where I'm doing something that other people do that I think this looks interesting, and that's how I expand my horizons. How would you characterize that for you?
Well, I think it's yes. There's an element of discomfort when you're trying something new. Like, it's sort of pointless if it's easy. Like, for instance, I can wake up in the morning and say, you know what, I'm going to be the best tic-tac-toe player in the world. Sort of pointless. Like, what's the point of that? But if there's something that scares me, like a classic example is something like stand-up comedy, where many people are terrified to go up on stage and tell jokes to a room of 20 strangers. And there's no real reason to be terrified of that. It's just so that we are. It's like almost like this primal thing. And so to overcome that fear was not a pleasant experience. In fact, often it's an incredibly unpleasant experience to this day. But there's a pleasure in knowing that I could do it, or I could start the process and get better. And again, like I say, there's a skill to reinventing. There's not just a skill to comedy or a skill to business. There's a skill to learning, like a meta skill. And I like that. I like engaging in that meta skill. I like picking something that has a very steep learning curve, starting at the bottom of that curve and feeling the joy of moving up that curve. And that for me is pleasurable, even if there's very unpleasurable parts along the way.
One of my favorite ways to articulate that experience is Steven Ranella. He's a writer and a hunter and a glorious writer. He's got a show called Meat Eater. He just goes out and hunts things, and sometimes he spends 4 days out in the woods looking at a moose and never getting a shot at it and coming home empty-handed. And what he describes, or how he describes hunting it is, or how he encapsulated it, was to say, hunting is a place where you get really fucking good at being goddamn uncomfortable.
Yeah, well, and I would say that is true for everything in life that's worth getting good at. So, for instance, I don't know, give me an area and I can tell you where it's uncomfortable. Like, I'll just start off with when I was a kid playing chess. Whether you're a chess master or a beginner, you're going to probably lose as many games as you win. It's probably always going to be 50% of the games you win and 50% of the games you lose. Because as you rise up, you play better players. So it should be the case. You know, there's only small periods where you're winning most of your games. That's when you
keep seeking out the loss so you can grow.
Yeah. But you have to have the loss. So then you study the games and you learn from them and you learn where you made mistakes, and that's how you grow. A lot of times people stay at the same level because they never study their losses and they never grow. So that's the same thing that happens in science. You do an experiment, it doesn't work. You study why it didn't work. You reconstruct the experiment. You try it again. You see what happens. Or with comedy, you go up on stage, you tell a joke. If people laugh or if people don't laugh, you look at the video afterwards. You always videotape everything. I like when you saw me in Venice last week, I videotaped my performance. I studied it afterwards.
How long did you do?
And you tried to improve. I did 13 minutes. 13 minutes and 13 seconds. Mm-hmm. So I know because of the video. And I said the word a little too much in the beginning, which, probably because it was a new kind of audience for me and I was maybe a little nervous. But overall, it doesn't seem like people noticed it that much, but I noticed it. And again, like you going on stage in front of a brand new audience, so there was about 200 people there, and I was a little nervous. I was scared, and people always told me California audiences are different than New York audiences. I had never experienced that before. Was it true? So I think it's true. For one thing, that particular audience was like a home audience. Like it was people who lived in the area. Yeah. So when I perform in New York City often, it's tourists in the audience, and there were probably no tourists in that audience. So that's a different kind of feeling. Also, I do think California comedians are a little different than New York City comedians. Yeah. I think they're more, they have very observant, they're very good at observing and having good opinions. They're not necessarily, this may or may not be true. So I don't see as many punchlines in comedians there, and I don't know why. But New York City the punchlines might be trite, but they're punchlines. So, and not as observant. So there was subtle differences I felt between New York and California. It could be because in New York, there's more late night TV shows being filmed here. So people are preparing their 5 minutes for late night TV. And in California, there's more acting. So people are more preparing for their next acting gig. Yeah, exactly. So who knows what makes the differences, and who knows if my analysis is accurate. This is only the first time I was observing this, but that's something to test and experiment with. But I enjoy kind of that process of really figuring out what it means. What's the difference between, good performance and bad performance? What does it mean for success in every industry? So, for instance, if you are an investor, success is measured by money. If you're a writer, though, is success measured by money? Is it success measured by book reviews? Is success measured by impact? If you're same thing with podcasts, and then once you kind of define for yourself what does performance mean and how do you measure it, and what does success mean and how do you measure it, and the two things are different, right? So you look at an area like running, okay?
This episode of the Break It Down Show is brought to you by Lions Rock Productions.
That's us.
We publish, evaluate, and develop podcasts just like this one, consult others to build their own, and create associated content and content marketing strategies.
So if you're launching or expanding your social media presence, your business or your personal brand, or if you just want to take your media presence to the next level,
reach out to us on Twitter
at Pete A. Turner
or at JohnLG69
at the Break It Down Show.
There's 1,000 ways to get a hold of us.
Now enjoy the show.
Right? So you look at an area like running, okay? It's very easy to measure performance. Usain Bolt is measured exactly by how fast he could run 40 meters. But the person who comes in second is only 0.1 second behind him. 1/10 of a second behind him is the number 2 person always in any race that Usain Bolt wins. And yet Usain Bolt probably, in terms of success, he probably makes 10, 20 million a year in endorsements. Number 2 probably makes 0. So success is, and again, depending on how you measure it, success is very different from performance, and how you and you have to kind of decide in a reinvention how you're going to, what are you going for? How are you maximizing these different things, and how do you define them? And then once you define them, how do you achieve your performance metrics, and how do you move up in your success metrics? You may not want to have financial success. You may just want to be the best runner you know how to be, the best comedian you know how to be, and that might not be what the world wants to reward at that time. So it's very interesting for me to study that. And then, I'll think about stand-up comedy for a second. Or let's say a game like poker. A lot of people start, from poker, and they want to get great because you can make money at it. You don't have to work at a job. You make your own hours, whatever. What I like to study is when can I borrow from other things, from other areas which I've mastered, to get good at something new. So, for instance, John, you've been a private investigator. Let's say now you want to be good at poker. There's probably some skills you've learned from being a private investigator that will help with learning
identifying
poker.
tells and stuff like that.
Yeah, and what I call that is you've put in your 10,000 hours of being a private investigator, or your 3,000 hours, or your 5,000 hours, and now you can borrow some of those hours and put them into the poker bucket. And learning how to do that, I think, is an interesting skill. So that, again, that's a meta learning.
Well, I was going to ask you how your frame of reference has changed because, if you go to film school, let's say, and you do change careers at some point, you're going to relate your things that you learn in the new thing to the old thing. Like you said, you've got a level of mastery at something. You're going to, just in the learning process, relate new things to that just so you can put it in a framework. How often do you find yourself going back to your computer science framework, or have you done enough things now that it's far in the rearview mirror and you don't fall back into that because you've learned so many new skills? Which one is it?
Well, I think again the primary skill is the skill of reinvention. It's the skill of learning how to learn, and I think that's the same whether from chess to computer programming to making a TV show to making a podcast to being great at poker or stand-up comedy or business or investing. There's this meta skill which applies to all of those things, which is learning how to learn. Anything worth learning kind of falls under this category of it's difficult and I need to get good at learning in order to get good at learning X, whatever X is. And so the way I got good at computer programming is the same way I get good at anything now. And I feel like I get better and better at learning how to learn. So what happens is, they say there's this 10,000 hour rule where you supposedly have to spend 10,000 hours to achieve peak mastery in an area. And I think what I try to get good at is reducing those 10,000 hours as much as possible, because I don't want to spend 10,000 hours now learning new things. I want to speed up the process, and I think I'm really good at speeding up the process now. For knocking on wood, not with everything, but with the things that I love doing.
Those 10,000 hours, right? They're hard earned, and if we were to look at what 10,000 hours is, that's a 40-hour-a-week job for 5 years to get to that point. Yeah. So, like to actually put 40 hours a week into learning anything is a significant investment. How fast can you learn something, do you think?
I think you can learn. I think if you've done it once, I think you can learn something related and achieve the same level in, like, let's say 1,000 to 2,000 hours. And depending on how closely related, probably less than 3,000 or 4,000 hours. So for instance, let's say I put in the 10,000 hours of chess and I'm a master level player. Now I want to play backgammon. Well, those are two related. They're related. They're games. They're one-on-one games. And, poker's related as well. And I didn't have to put in as many hours to achieve the same level. Maybe I had to put in, 2,000 hours. For comedy, it's a little bit related to public speaking, and it's a little bit related to writing. So I borrowed from my hours of writing and from my hours of comedy and from my hours spent doing a podcast and from my hours spent going on different TV shows. And, I'm still in the process of learning, obviously. But, I would say I've put in couple thousand hours now, and I'm starting to reach a point where I'm happy with it. Like I still there's still much room for improvement. I mean, the more you learn, the more you realize you need to improve. I think that's also a truism for anything worth learning. I think even the world chess champion sees more than anybody how much they have to learn to improve. And but I'm getting to a level where I feel it's a little harder to tell the difference between me and a professional on the stage for like a 15-minute set. So, I'm getting better and better at it because I'm able to quickly borrow these hours. And I think about this a lot. Like I love the science of learning. So Anders Ericsson, he's a professor from Florida who came up with the 10,000 hour rule. I've actually he's been on my podcast. I've corresponded with him about comedy and about this idea I have about borrowing from other 10,000 hours.
And using that to truncate the process.
In order to get good. Yeah. And then also I like reframing it as not 10,000 hours, but maybe 10,000 experiments. So, a couple weeks ago, I had an opportunity to perform on the same stage as one of my favorite comedians. And I was given the choice, do you want to go before him or do you want to go after him?
Who was it, first of all?
Now, before him...
Who was it?
TJ Miller. He played Erlich Bachman on Silicon Valley. He's in Deadpool. And I really like his style. He's good at improvisation. He's got good material. He's good at being very physical on stage. He's good at committing to the joke. Even if the joke is not quite working, he'll commit harder and harder to the joke. So I like his style. So I was given the choice. Do you want to go before him, which would be easy because the crowd wouldn't yet know that he was coming on the stage, or do I want to go immediately after him? And I was scared to death to go immediately after him because the crowd would still be buzzing. We just watched this great comedian, and then there's me. And so, of course, I chose to go immediately after him because
your balls are
that would be the only way I would improve from that set, and is giving myself that challenge. So I always it's never about that one set. I'm never trying to do like the best in that one set. I'm trying to always improve. And so take the harder choice each time. Not so hard you can't do it, but hard enough that it's a challenge and that you're afraid. Always push yourself so that you're a little bit afraid. Like if someone said to me, do you want to be the passenger of the plane or do you want to be the pilot? I'm never going to say be the pilot because then the plane would crash. But if someone said, you want to be on a plane where there's a little bit more turbulence, sure, I'll take that plane.
And do you want to maybe sit in the
faster.
co-pilot's seat and learn a new something and take the yoke at some point during that flight? That's the one that you choose.
I probably wouldn't want to do that either.
Well,
I still don't want to risk the plane crashing. But
one of the things though that you point out is a perfect reflection of Jay Leno. And he always says that he got good because he would go to the Comedy Store on Sunday nights and he would go right after Richard Pryor. And Richard Pryor would slay the place. And then he would get up and he would tell 10 jokes and he would find out that the 10 jokes that he thought were great, 6 of them were not that great.
Yeah, and think about that. Like Richard Pryor, their styles are very different. Richard Pryor, he's telling these very honest, heart-wrenching stories growing up, with prostitutes and what was like that like. And Jay Leno, and growing up in all the difficult situations he grew up in, Jay Leno is very much like da-da-da, 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 da-da-da. Like, premise, punchline, premise, punchline. You never know anything about his personal life at all from his stand-up. And so he gave himself a very great challenge, and that's how he became, whether you like him or not, he's clearly one of the best in the world. So, and he proved it doing it for, I don't know, God knows how many years as the Tonight Show host. And so...
so how did you do after TJ Miller?
I did very good. And what I realized was I was able to almost borrow from his energy on the stage and take it with me into my set. So I learned a new thing that I didn't know before, which is that was possible. And so that was of comfort. And then I was able to stick to my own voice, just like Jay Leno did. And it was an audience downtown on Wall Street. Actually, it was a club down on Wall Street in New York City. And I found that was my crowd more than anybody else's crowd that was going up that night. So I was able to play off of that a little bit. And so I did good. I had a similar experience happen 2 weeks ago. Bill Burr went on before me.
Wow.
And Bill Burr is one of the greatest ever. And he had so much energy and so much presence on stage that I was terrified. I was like, oh my God, how am I going to follow this guy? And yet I was able to do it. I did the technique of playing off of his energy a little bit, and I wasn't as observational as him. He was very observational and up to date, but I did my own thing, and it was fine. I feel like I did very well. And in fact, I did well enough that the owners of that club were surprised and invited me back.
That's great. Well,
So-
for our listeners who are
Yeah.
out there going, I would never in a million years do that, I think the lesson here is you had a room full of people. Bill Burr and in TJ's case, TJ Miller, went in and they killed the room. But it turns out that there were a bunch of people there who still wanted to laugh some more. And you were able to deliver them some more laughs.
Right, like they're there to laugh,
Right.
the audience, and everybody was afraid, like, oh my gosh, Bill Burr, I can't go on after him. He's gonna kill the room. But no, the audience wants to laugh, and if you just stay in the moment and you're having fun, then you could win in those environments. But it was something I had to learn, because I've definitely been in situations where I followed a great comedian and then I completely died. Like a couple of years ago, I followed Judah Friedlander, he's in the show 30 Rock, and very good stand-up. Most people don't know he's a very good stand-up comedian, and he destroyed, meaning he did very good, and I just could not figure out how to follow him, and I completely died. And now I think I could probably do that a little better. But all this is kind of related to other things. Like, we're focusing on comedy, but it's also related to investing. It's related to entrepreneurship. It's all the same kind of meta skills. Putting yourself in difficult situations, but not too difficult. And like, you don't want to get in being an entrepreneur, you don't want to get into a situation where you have a payroll to make and, let's take it right up into the last second and get a client who helps us make payroll. Like, you want to take calculated risks, not stupid risks. And you want to take the sort of risks that keep you in the game and help you learn. So following Bill Burr on a comedy lineup is not going to take me out of the game. Even if I completely bomb, it's not going to take me out of the game. Even if I bomb, I'm still going to learn.
Even better,
I'll study the video.
I've been known to grab an open mic myself recently, and
good for
you. And you, it's a badge of honor to go. I remember I was we had a comedy club here in San Francisco, and it was called Brainwashed, and it was a comedy club and a laundromat. And I remember going up there, and I didn't do all that great. I was just kind of fumbling around, and I'm thinking to myself while I'm up there, because I listen to a lot of comedy podcasts too, hey, I'm up here eating a bag of dicks, as the saying goes. And I thought, this is great. And it was fun.
And Louis C.K. uses that phrase in one of his jokes in a special from 2009, where he analyzes, like, what does that actually mean, a bag of dicks? And it's very funny. But yeah, and an open mic is a different kind of challenge. In an open mic, the audience is mostly other people who want to
they're waiting
comedians.
to get their time on the list as well. So
and they're scared. So they're not really there to laugh. As opposed to like a normal comedy night, the audience is not there to laugh. They're there to go on stage. So it's very hard to get laughs in an open mic. So you might have you feel like you're bombing. You might not be bombing at all. You don't know in an open mic. And an open mic is a different kind of challenge. Like, you sort of decide in advance, what is my challenge here? Am I going to try to make them laugh? Am I trying to work on material? How will I judge the material if it's good or not? Am I just practicing stage presence? How will I judge if it's good or not? So it's a different kind of challenge, an open mic, than...
Well, I'm gonna take those as encouraging words, but let's flip back over, as you started to do, to the world of investing. What's the equivalent in investing? Because every time you eat that bag of dicks as an investor, you're losing money. Does it
Yeah.
feel the same?
Yeah, it's horrible. It's
when you're
horrible.
taking a loss and,
Like,
and learning a lesson.
Well, and you're not only taking a loss, you're taking a loss with other people's money if you're a professional investor. Not only your own money, but other people's money. I was a hedge fund manager, so I invested not only my own money, but the money of my investors. And so when you lose money, it's the worst feeling in the world. So why does anybody do it? Because, well, A, it's potentially lucrative. It's not necessarily lucrative. It's like any other job. And I loved investing. It was a skill I wanted to learn. Now, again, anytime there's a skill you love learning, it doesn't mean you're going to be happy all the time. It should mean that you suck most of the time and you're getting better. Now, you don't want to suck while you're investing other people's money, but even the best investors in the world had bad years last year. I can name a handful of people who had, negative or horrible returns last year. And there's many examples of this all the time. Like, Warren Buffett's partner, Charlie Munger, he was a professional investor in 1973 and 74. And I think he was down 20% each of those years, his first 2 years as a professional investor, investing other people's money. He just sucked at it. And then he finally made back to even in 1975, 76. I think those were the years. And he decided that's it for me. And he gave all the money back. But he learned a lot. And, he's been very successful as the vice chairman of Berkshire Hathaway for the past 50 years or 40 years. And as a result, he's a billionaire. So, again, he learned skills that he was able to bring into another area, a very closely related area, which was investing the money of an insurance company. And he was, and also advising. He was a great advisor to a very successful investor, Warren Buffett. And so he brought his skills that he learned as a professional investor into these very closely related skills. And he became very successful at that. So, again, losing money is it feels horrible because they actually measure it. Your every one of your chemicals that are related to happiness goes down, and your libido goes down. Everything, you feel like horrible. But again, losing is a great way to learn. I've made so many bad investments, and each and every one of them, I would say I've learned from. Whereas I probably haven't learned as much from good investments. Maybe I've learned once from good investments. This is why this investment was good. Just repeat this. And then I've learned a lot from the bad investments. Like, I didn't do what I was doing in the good one. I made this mistake. And I've learned a lot from the bad investments.
It forces you to dig into more detail. I want to remind our listeners, JamesAltucher.com. Go there. There's plenty of stuff, blog posts. Listen to the James Altucher Show.
I do have a question. We're talking about this 10,000 hours thing and powering hours. You have the, and we do too, the luxury of talking to great people like you've had Gilbert Gottfried on and recently had Evan Carmichael on. All these people, I would imagine, give you the ability. You've talked about in the comedy part about the early hours, like learning about crowds and observational and the different types of comedy. And so you can bring some of those hours and transplant them early on the ramp as you go up. But when you talk to these experts, people that mentor billionaires and all these things, you must be getting some of the hours from the very end of the ramp that are given back to you, where the end of the ramp is brought to you a little bit. Like Jay Moore talks about working the crowd in front of the mic before you ever even tell a joke. So
absolutely. Like with investing, I've talked to some of the best investors in the world on my podcast, or with, with achieving any kind of peak performance. I've had on Tony Hawk, who was world champion skateboarder 11 years in a row. I've had on Gary Kasparov, who was the world chess champion for 20 years. I've had on Tyra Banks, who's in her 30th season of America's Next Top Model. She's peak performer in several areas of life. I've had on Judy Blume, who sold over 100 million copies of her books. Richard Branson, Ray Dalio, like all these amazing people. So with comedians and comedy, if something bad happened to me the night before, I'll just ask the question, like, let's say, hypothetically, XYZ happens to you on the stage. What would you do? I've had enormous benefit by talking to the best people in the world at what they do and how they've overcome various hurdles. along the way, because they've all had hurdles along the way. Would you believe Tyra Banks, when she came up with the idea for America's Next Top Model, she went to her agent and she said, I'm the best model in the world right now, or close to it, and American Idol is the best show, the highest rated show out there right now. How about we combine the two? And the agent was like, nah, that sounds like a bad idea. And she had to switch agents and really pursue this idea that is, in retrospect, is such a no-brainer. Right. And now she's in her 30th season, but she had to basically say, he's wrong, and I'm not going to let this dissuade me. And, as someone who just, like, Pete, when you saw me in L.A., I was spending my days pitching a TV show. It's very easy to get dissuaded by the so-called experts. And that's a natural thing, to be dissuaded by the experts and to feel discouraged and even depressed by their reactions in some cases. But you have to get through that and say, well, where were they right? Where were they wrong? And do I believe in this enough that I want to push it forward? And if so, do I change it? And Tyra Banks did all that and succeeded. And same thing for Sarah Blakely, who I've interviewed. She's worth about $5 billion. She created Spanx. Took her 8 years to find even the first bit of success after she had the idea. And it was just persistence. Part of it is persistence. Part of it is networking. Part of it is how good are your skills. Part of it is luck. And you have to kind of mesh all that together to have a winning formula.
One of the attitudes that I think I learned from Pete is that 100 years from now, it's likely that nobody's going to give a shit. So, right. As we attempt these things, as we endure these failures, as we go into these uncomfortable situations, hey, maybe we get lucky and we run into a home run, and 100 years from now somebody cares about some minuscule part of something that we did, and great, that's terrific. But ultimately, the likelihood is that this place is going to be, it's still going to exist 100 years from now, and we will be dust floating around somewhere else. So,
yeah, well, it's funny you mention that, because I a few months ago in one of my stand-up performances, I was making a joke about one of my daughters wanted to find her passion, or no, not her passion, her purpose in life. And I was like, who told you had a purpose? Because and then I asked the audience, and by the way, I'm not asking you guys because no one knew the answer. I asked a question to the audience that it was about 120 people in the audience, nobody knew the answer. And the question was, who was president of the United States right before Abraham Lincoln? So arguably one of the most important presidents ever, because he's the president that kind of caused the Civil War.
James Buchanan.
James Buchanan, correct. But nobody in the audience knew the answer. One person actually shouted out George Washington, and that was the only person who dared to answer. Yeah. But think about it. When James Buchanan was a little boy, he said what every other little boy was saying: when I grow up, I'm going to be president of the United States. And he actually was the one person out of 50 million people who achieved his dreams and became president of one of the most important countries. He was one of the most important people on the planet. And not only that, he kind of caused the worst war in U.S. history as measured by percentage of U.S. citizen deaths. And yet not a single person in the audience knew who he was. So you're right. It's like, it doesn't really matter. Like, everyone is like, oh, what kind of effect are you going to have on the world? Are you going to have positive impact on the world? It's great to have positive impact on the world. I'm not saying don't be good to people, don't have positive impact, but don't fool yourself into thinking people are going to remember you. Nobody's going to remember. You're right. And so you have to really do it ultimately for yourself, not in a selfish way, but if you want to have the greatest impact, make sure you're having the impact on you first, or else you've just wasted your life. If you're always doing for others and you're perpetually unhappy in the hopes that 100 years from now someone's going to remember you, you just wasted your life.
So in addition to the James Altucher show, which everybody should listen to and subscribe to and all that stuff, you've got 400 plus episodes on that show, and they're all terrific. And you've named many of your guests, but you also had let's see, you had a show called Ask Altucher, and you had a show called Question of the Day that you did with Stephen Dubner. And those were great shows, and I'm sorry that those shows haven't endured. Can I ask why? What makes you cut them off, or is it just simply that you don't have time and it just didn't work out?
Well, okay, like Question of the Day is a great example. Question of the Day, I did with Stephen Dubner, as you mentioned. He's the co-author of Freakonomics, and we would kind of look for interesting questions on Twitter or Quora or wherever, and we would ask them to each other and discuss them. And I don't know, we did a couple hundred episodes of that. The downloads were great. Every single episode was getting a ton of downloads, like just as much as the James Altucher show is now. And we were making money from it, actually, because our costs weren't very high. And like we didn't have to deal with, guests and so on. So it made it a little easier to schedule. And but it wasn't growing. And it was sort of plateauing, the number of downloads. And it just didn't feel that great to just stay the same all the time. And we didn't feel like we were growing. We ended up asking, like I remember one time we started off an episode and I asked a question, and the audio producer said through the headphones, "Oh, James, you asked that 25 episodes ago." And then I posed another question, and Nathan, the audio producer, said, "Oh, James, you asked that already." I asked another question. Nathan's like, "Sorry, James, you already asked that one." I asked with this one on 9 times. I had asked, I didn't even remember I had asked these questions. And so we just weren't really growing in the right way. And Steven and I are great friends. We just played backgammon together the day before yesterday, or maybe yesterday, I forget. But I just didn't feel like it was growing, and it was taking time away from my show, and for him it was taking away time from the Freakonomics show, and it was taking time away from my writing. So it's stuff like that. When you feel like you're kind of plateauing and not really growing, and you don't really know how to grow, maybe it's time to take a step back. We might do a reunion show on my show just for the fun of it. It was sometimes you just get this feeling like I'm not really gaining by this. No one else is really growing from it anymore because we're just talking about the same issues. And that was that.
Well, from your listener base, I will say, speaking for all of us, it's fun being a fly on the wall while you guys just bullshit. So whenever you want to do that reunion show, there's value in it for our.
Well, you know what we're doing, and I think we started this. I think we started yesterday. Is that right, Jay? We started yesterday. Did we release the show with just me and Steve yesterday? So with my podcast producer, Steve Cohen, we decided half our shows now will be with guests, and those are always great. I love the guests. And half the shows will be me ranting on an issue, or rather I should say discussing an issue with my podcast producer, who's a very intelligent guy. That has more of a feel of like Question of the Day or Ask Altucher. And that's a lot of fun because I feel like I could take my new skills from comedy and kind of borrow from those skills now into podcasting and see how I've improved on that kind of format of me discussing an important issue to myself.
Terrific.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Well, then that begs the question.
I think we just released the first one of those yesterday, and it was fun.
It's different in that you do get to a point where there's a little better shorthand and there's a little more familiarity. And I ask this because we have several repeat guests who come on, a year later, and we just had Jordan Harbinger on for the second time after he's done his new show for a year, and it was neat to go back and reflect, and it was a different conversation because we know each other.
There's a saying, your best new customers or your old customers. I love it when I have a guest that I have a lot of rapport with and a lot of chemistry with, and Jordan Harbinger is one of those. I've had on AJ Jacobs quite a bit. He's written a bunch of best-selling books. I've had on Tucker Max quite a bit. Brian Koppelman, who is the creator of Billions, he's been on like about 4 or 5 times. Amy Morin, who wrote the book 13 Things Mentally Strong People Don't Do, she's been on maybe 6 times. I love having on repeat guests.
And that is my question. We'll see you this time next year?
Yeah,
Terrific.
Of course.
Hey, and before we close up, because we're running into your hour here, thanks for telling the Byron Allen story.
Oh, you mean That was I would say that is one of my, people always ask me, who are your favorite guests? And I don't really know who the favorite guest is. It's a hard question to answer, and obviously you don't want to insult the guests who you forget about.
Yeah, there are many, and it depends what day you ask and what you recall.
But I loved that episode because it was combined so many of my interests, like comedy and entrepreneurship and investing, and Byron is so
tenacity, and bootstrapping and all of everything.
I learned so much from that podcast with Byron Allen. I'm in there. I'm not a journalist, right? And we're all doing this podcasting thing, not to just expose something, but to learn. And I learned so much from Byron Allen that day. He had such a great story.
Well, hey man, thank you. Thanks for coming on the show. You are, of course, you delivered as we imagined you would, but I'm elated that you will come back, and we will keep following you, and we'll even do more inside stuff because we're going to continue to consume. For our audience, once again, JamesAltucher.com, where you can start off seeing everything, and you can just spider out from there. And you can read.
Well, thanks so much for having me on the show. I really appreciate it. I'm so grateful that you guys asked me.
James Altucher, everybody.